staff please brief the bill?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Kellen Wright, staff to the committee. The bill before you is House Bill 1628, increasing the supply of affordable housing by modifying the state and local real estate excise tax. First, some background on real estate excise taxes. Excise taxes are taxes imposed on a specific good or activity. In Washington, there are numerous excise taxes imposed on things like cigarettes, syrup, and aircraft. There's also an excise tax imposed on the sale of real estate. This tax can be imposed is imposed by the state and can be imposed by cities and counties as well. Just to make it less of a mouthful, I'm going to call it REET going forward for real estate excise tax. The state imposes a graduated REET on the sale of property that is not timberland or agricultural land. The graduated rate is on the portion of the selling price up to $525,000, 1.1%. On the portion that is more than $525,000 but equal to or less than $1,525,000, the rate is 1.28%. On the portion that is more than $1,525,000 but less than $3,025,000 is taxed at 2.75%. And any portion of the selling price that's over $3,025,000 is taxed at 3% of the selling price. The Department of Revenue adjusts these thresholds every 4 years. This is done by adjusting the first price threshold, that of the $500,000 or now $525,000 threshold, by the lesser of the growth in the Consumer Price Index for shelter, or 5%. If the change in the Consumer Price Index for shelter is 0 or negative, then the price threshold remains the same. Once the increase in the first price threshold is determined, each other threshold is increased by an identical amount. First updates to these price thresholds occurred on January 1st of this year. It resulted in an increase of 5% to the first price threshold because 5% was less than the increase in the CPI for shelter. And this increased the first threshold by $25,000, and then each other threshold was increased by the same amount, resulting in an increase of $25,000 on each threshold. That's why it's $525,000 or $1,525,000 instead of $500,000 or $1.5 million, because each was increased by $25,000. As I mentioned, the graduated rate does not apply to timberland or agricultural land, which is subject to a flat tax of 1.28%, no matter the selling price. Until June 30th of this year, the revenue from the state real estate excise tax is deposited as follows: 1.7% into the Public Works Assistance Account, which is used to make loans to local governments for public works projects. 1.4% to the City County Assistance Account, which provides fundings to counties and cities based on their size and how their sales and property tax revenue compares to the statewide average. 79.4% to the State General Fund, and 17.5% to the Education Legacy Trust Account, which is used to support education. As I said, this applies till June 30th of this year. After that date, the portion going to the Public Works Assistance Account increases by 3.5%, while that going to the Education Legacy Trust Account decreases by 3.5%. So that's the state REET. Counties and cities are also authorized to impose real estate excise taxes. There are 5 different types that they can impose. 5 different types that counties can impose, 3 of which can also be imposed by cities. First, any local government, or city or county, can impose a real estate excise tax of up to 1/4%. This tax is imposed by the legislative authority of the local government, and the revenue can be used in general for capital facilities with some limitations depending on the size of the jurisdiction and whether it plans under the GMA. The local government can also use some of the revenue for maintenance and support of capital projects under certain conditions. The second REET available to local governments can only be imposed by local governments that plan under the Growth Management Act. This tax can also be imposed legislatively if the local government is required to plan under the GMA, as 18 counties are, but can be only imposed after a vote in the 10 counties that have chosen to plan under the GMA, but they are not required to do so. This tax can also be imposed at up to 1/4% of the selling price. These funds can be used for financing certain capital infrastructure projects identified in the capital facilities element of the comprehensive plan, for parks and until January 1st of 2026, and under certain conditions, for facilities for those experiencing homelessness and for affordable housing projects. The funds available for use related to homelessness and affordable housing projects are limited to the greater of $100,000 or 25% of the revenue, up to a maximum of $1 million. A local government must demonstrate that it has sufficient funds during the next 2 years for its capital infrastructure projects in order to use the funds for homelessness or affordable housing purposes. If certain conditions are met, some of this revenue can also be used for maintenance of existing capital projects. The final three local government REITs are not widely used, so I'll just cover them briefly. One is a 0.5% REIT that can be imposed if a local government does not impose a 0.5% sales tax. Nearly all governments have opted to impose the sales tax. I believe there is only one city that has elected to impose the extra REIT. I think that is the city of Asotin. The final two are only available to counties. One is a voter-approved 1% real estate excise tax that can be used for conservation areas. The final tax is a voter-approved 0.5% real estate excise tax for affordable housing. Only San Juan County has imposed these two final real estate excise taxes, and in fact, no other county than San Juan is able to impose the affordable housing real estate excise tax, because the imposition of that tax requires that the full conservation area REIT must have been imposed by the county before 2003, and only San Juan County met the deadline. Some transfers of property are exempted from being considered a sale and thus exempted, not subject to real estate excise taxation. These exemptions include, among other things, transfers made by gifts, inheritance, transfers made pursuant to a dissolution of marriage, or the transfer of a mortgage interest in the property. Some of the exemptions apply to sales and transfers related to low-income housing. All right, now that covers real estate excise tax briefly. I'd also like to briefly touch on some of the accounts that are referenced in this bill. The Washington Housing Trust Fund is used to provide grants and loans for housing assistance projects that will provide housing to those with special needs and with incomes at or below 50% of the median area income. It's administered by the Department of Commerce. The Apple Health and Homes account is also administered by the Department of Commerce. It is used to support permittive supportive housing programs. The Affordable Housing for All account is used to fund affordable housing programs. Now, Representative Gaynor had asked me a question about how much funding had been provided for affordable housing by the state. So I looked into that, and the number I found from the Office of Financial Management was $2.4 billion has been put forward towards reducing homelessness and providing affordable housing over the last 2 years. I'm not sure that if that includes funds actually expended or just funds that were earmarked. The 2022 capital budget included $114 million for the Housing Trust Fund, $60 million for the Apple Health and Homes account, and then the Affordable Housing for All account is funded by a recording surcharge. So I looked at the fiscal note for the bill establishing the account, and it estimated receipts of $29 million a year for the Affordable Housing for All account from that surcharge. All right, so that's all background. Turning now to this bill. It would add a new threshold for real estate excise tax beginning in 2025. The new threshold would apply a rate of 4% to that portion of the selling price that is over $5 million of a property. The increased revenue from this portion of the state real estate excise tax over what would have been collected without the new price threshold would be required to be deposited as follows. 30% would go to the Washington State Housing Trust Fund, 30% would go to the Apple Health and Homes account, 15% would go to a new Developmental Disabilities Trust account, and 25% would go to the Affordable Housing for All account. The Developmental Disabilities Trust account could be used for providing grants and forgivable loans to housing programs to support people with developmental disabilities. Beginning on January 1st of next year, the legislative authority of a local government could also impose an additional real estate excise tax at a rate of up to 1/4%. If a city did not impose the tax at the full rate by June 30th of 2024, the county could impose the tax within the city up to a combined rate of 1/4%. At least half of the revenue from this tax would have to be used for the construction or acquisition of affordable housing. Any remainder could be used for maintenance, operations, and services related to affordable housing, and can be only used for permanent housing rather than temporary, transitional, or shelter housing. Housing would be considered affordable if the monthly costs of the housing did not exceed 30% of the income of a household, making 60% of the county median income for rental housing, or did not exceed 35% of the monthly income if the housing is instead owner occupied. All right, just a couple more changes here. The expiration date of January 1st, 2026 for the use of revenue from the second of the 0.25% local government real estate excise taxes. The use allowed for that on facilities for those experiencing homelessness or for affordable housing projects would be removed. So it could be used that way going forward after January 1st, 2026. Up to $100,000 or 25% of the revenue from this tax option, whichever is greater, could be used on homeless or affordable housing facilities, meaning the $1 million cap on the maximum amount of revenue that could be used this way would be removed. Also, beginning on January 1st, 2024, the sale of any portion of an affordable housing development by a qualified entity to an organization that meets the requirements for property tax exemption as a nonprofit organization, housing authority, or public corporation, and that would be used for a community purpose would be exempt from real estate excise taxation. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that exhaustive explanation. Dare I ask if there are any questions? Ranking Member Gaynor.
Kellen, when you started, I didn't quite catch what you... Thank you, Kellen. That was an exhaustive one. I appreciate you being able to come up with the figure. So what I understood you to say is that we had $2.4 billion the last 2 years that were collected for these accounts?
Not just for these accounts, that was for affordable housing and homelessness overall, and that was according to what I found from OFM. They said okay. The legislature had put $2.4 billion total in the last 2 years towards those.
And of this money that's been collected and appropriated, do we have any reports of what's actually transpired as far as housing that's actually been built and put on the ground?
I can look into that. Some of these accounts were only recently created. For example, the affordable, the health, Apple Health and Homes account, I believe, was only created within the last couple of years, if not last year. So I don't know if there's been any reports on that, but I can look into that and let you know.
And then one final question here. With the increase in the tax, do we have any idea how much additional revenue would be collected based on past sales? Just, kind of a projection.
I believe that'll be included in the fiscal note, which we have not received the final fiscal note for this yet, but I think that information will be in there once we do receive it.
Okay, thank you.
While Representative Jacobson asks her question, I'd like to invite the prime sponsor up to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Kellen, if a apartment complex that was over $5 million over the threshold was sold under this, then would the new extra REET bucks have to be paid on the sale of an apartment complex?
It would be any sale of property over $5 million would be, the portion of the sale that's over the $5 million would be taxed at 4%.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, well, welcome to this exciting committee, Representative Chopp.
I'm riveted.
Please tell us about your bill.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and the members of the committee. For the record, my name is Frank Chopp. I'm here in support of the legislation, the Affordable Homes Act, House Bill 1628. Across the state, there's a housing crisis. Housing is a top priority of the people of Washington. It is rightly a top priority for this legislature and for the People's House. There's a tremendous shortage of affordable housing. The greatest need is for homes for people with low incomes. As you consider this proposal, please keep in mind the people we have a responsibility to help in this housing crisis. The low-wage workers who can't afford increasing rents or are forced to live far from their work. The homeless who are suffering and dying on our streets, in our parks, and under our highway overpasses. The people who are developmentally disabled, who are transitioning from state institutions to homes in our communities. The people among us with mental illness who are desperate to have decent supportive housing with treatment services to ensure their stability. The solution to these challenges is to expand the supply of housing through investment in our people. I urge you to support the Affordable Homes Act. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Any questions for the prime sponsor?
Do I get credit for being shorter than?
You, so much credit. So much credit. Okay. Ranking Member Gaynor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Rep. Chopp, I appreciate you bringing the bill forward, and there's some, positive things that you're addressing there. I guess I am curious, though, about the accountability piece as far as knowing what kind of return on our investment would be and is, given the fact that, we're constantly hearing that we're, in our current budgets, we're not putting behavioral health the priority from the providers that I'm hearing. I mean, I'm just wondering, how do you anticipate quantifying the benefit of the revenue that's going to be generated?
Well, first of all, we do have accountability measures built into programs like Apple Health and Homes, which is just starting, by the way. We only approved that last session. I'm also more than willing to work with you and other legislators, as I have for years, to increase funding for behavioral health. In fact, a key part of this housing is to provide homes with some supportive services for people who are mentally ill. Otherwise, they end up on the street, or in some cases dead, because of their mental illness. I think that's a shame, and I think we ought to do something about it in a constructive way that's positive, not only for that individual, but also the broader community. It's much better for the local businesses if people are off the street in front of their businesses into a decent home. In addition, Representative Gaynor, I'd love to take you on a tour of these projects. I mean, not all of them, obviously, that's too much, but I can give you a few examples, and you can ask all sorts of questions, and we can get into the cost per unit, the type of people being housed, the accountability measures for each of the projects, the standards that people have to live by if they're in these housing, for example. So I'm more than willing to take you on a tour if you want this weekend.
So I'll take you up on the offer. I mean, we've got some in our district that I have toured, and that's why I really am concerned. I mean, when we have a REET tax, I mean, everybody pays. So even the small, when I say the small, I mean the people that are starting out with homes, they're paying a REET, and so as it progresses, it appears that, well, it's just a little bit more, but it affects all of our society. I mean, we've kind of baked that into real estate sales. So I guess the other side of that is that we want to make housing affordable for all people, and I think that's the intent. But thank you for the offer.
Well, just to clarify, the local option REIT that's in the bill does apply to all properties except ag, of course, and forest lands. The state level thing is a progressive added increment for very high cost projects. Now, some of those are apartment buildings. For example, in my district recently, a apartment building was sold for $330 million. And the investor was from Europe. Not that I have anything against that, but the net result is he admitted in the public articles that he was doing it as a real estate investment. So those folks have got some leverage to do not only buildings for housing people of higher incomes, but we ought to try to help. Basically, the thing is that we need to care for those who are less fortunate with a little help from the most fortunate.
Thank you. Vice Chair Alvarado.
Thank you, Representative Chopp. We've heard some questions about accountability on the resources that are invested in some of our housing programs. Is for funds invested in the Housing Trust Fund, and maybe staff could follow up, there is annual reporting. There's long-term regulatory agreements that make the property affordable for the long term. There's ongoing monitoring and compliance. And there's also significant funds that are leveraged from federal, private, and local resources that help to match the state investment.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for your
Thanks.
testimony.
Thanks very much.
So with that, we'll suspend the hearing on HB 1628. I see some prime sponsors seated, so we will open the hearing on HB 1575. Staff, please.
We have a remote panel with Janice Zahn, Mason Thompson, and Kelly Curtis. Please go ahead, Janice Son.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Chair Doer and honorable committee members. For the record, my name is Janice Zahn, and I'm a council member for the city of Bellevue. We appreciate the opportunity to weigh in alongside other East King County cities. While many might think that Bellevue is a flourishing city, we know that over the years, we lack enough affordable housing options for people who want to call Bellevue home. This is part of why affordable housing is one of our city's top legislative priorities. High property values in our city make affordable housing very challenging. Half of the revenue generated under this bill would be dedicated to construction or acquisition of new units of affordable housing and facilities. This bill is a game changer. Likewise, the flexibility to focus remaining revenue on operations, maintenance, and services tied to permanent affordable housing is key. State investment is critical to making these real progress on housing affordability. Bellevue is at the table, but we can't do it alone. We thank you for this bill.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mason Thompson.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Doer and members of the committee. Mason Thompson, Mayor of the City of Bothell, and here to testify in support of House Bill 1628. One of our city's top legislative priorities this session is to support policies and funding that increase the availability of housing constructed in our state. Our housing crisis is complex and requires the legislature address it from several angles, commonly referred to as subsidy, stability, and supply. House Bill 1648 tackles one of those angles, providing additional resources for affordable housing providers to construct more units. And these are the housing units we need the most. The market's not going to deliver them. We appreciate the bill providing both for state programs and provides a local option revenue stream for communities who choose to do more to support affordable housing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Kelly Curtis.
Good morning, Chair Doer and members of the committee. I am Councilmember Kelly Curtis of the City of Kirkland, and on behalf of the Kirkland City Council, we support HB 1628 and thank Representative Chopp for sponsoring it. Kirkland has actively partnered and taken many actions to increase our housing supply. As you are aware, development of affordable housing often relies on limited public funding. Expanding funding options available to cities will enable Kirkland to improve our ability to meet the needs of our growing community. The flexibility offered in REET 1 and 2 has allowed Kirkland to make substantial investments in local projects to provide hundreds of new and renovated units of affordable housing. With the looming expiration of the flexibility in REET 1 and 2 and the ever-growing need for housing, the timing could not be more urgent to establish a dedicated revenue source to support this priority. A new REET 3 would allow Kirkland to continue our efforts so that every member of our community will have access to housing.
Thank you very much.
Next in person, we have Diana Stadden, Michelle Thomas, Nicholas Carr.
You're good? All right. Hi, I'm Michelle Thomas, pro in House Bill 1628. Washington has an affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Based on forthcoming data from the Department of Commerce, Washington needs 1 million additional homes by 2044, and over 72% of those homes must be affordable to people that the for-profit market will not build housing for. This is housing that requires public subsidy and is housing built and supported by the Housing Trust Fund. House Bill 1628's time has come. The capital budget alone cannot invest enough to solve the crisis. Washington needs a multi-pronged approach that includes a dedicated fund source and more local options. A dedicated fund source will not only create a certain level of minimum funding for the Housing Trust Fund, but it will allow our communities to plan. Right now, all we can do is be reactive to what the legislature decides to do with each capital budget. We need a clear path out of our state's affordable housing crisis, and we will not pave one without a dedicated fund source for the programs created that would be funded by this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning again, Chair Doer and committee members. My name is Nicholas Carr, for the record, Intergovernmental Affairs for Tacoma Housing Authority. I'm actually representing the Association of Washington Housing Authorities right now, and in support of House Bill 1628. We want to work closely with our cities to build affordable housing that responds to the needs of our community, but there are not sufficient resources currently to make that happen. Housing authorities are uniquely positioned to support cities in their efforts to create affordable housing. We are builders who operate our own housing and associated services. We are partners in financing, providing subsidy through vouchers or project-based financing programs to our nonprofit housing partners, and we're adept at acquiring and preserving housing for residents when they need it, to counter market rate forces in acquisitions. Sometimes we are actually able to help transition people to homeownership through a voucher to homeownership programs. All of these avenues public housing authorities use to provide safe, affordable housing require increasingly limited financial capacity. To continue these lines of work and make them more abundant and effective, localities and PHAs need access to more resources and federal programs like the LIHTC program. HB 1628 is a smart policy. Will create more opportunities for local jurisdictions.
Thank you very
to partner,
much.
and we support it wholly.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, I understand.
Please go ahead, remote Diana, and then we'll move in person to Greg Hannon, Mike Ennis, and Tim Eyman.
Good afternoon, Chair Deere and members of the committee. I'm Diana Stadden with the ARC of Washington State, and we advocate for people with developmental disabilities and their families. Housing for people with developmental disabilities is desperately needed, and there's currently no major funding source to meet that need. Last year, House Bill 1080 directed a study on this issue, which told you there's about 37,000 people with developmental disabilities who need housing. Many of the parents are in their 90s and still taking care of their adult children with DV that are in their 70s because there's no housing. Please pass House Bill 1628 and provide the vulnerable people who need a place to live instead of keeping them stuck in hospitals or in state institutions or living on the street. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Greg Hannon, representing NAIOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, and speaking in opposition to House Bill 1628. I have emailed the committee more detailed information that supports my brief comments today. The combination of the 2019 REET increase and the current economy means that the REET tax has become a major factor in how investments are made in this region. Raising it even further at a time when property values are dropping, interest rates are climbing, and the post-COVID realities of work from home or decreasing demand for office space will take many would-be sales off the table and depress multifamily housing starts in Washington. 15 states impose no REET tax. Most that do are at less than 1%. Washington is currently tied with Delaware at the highest state rate, and this proposal would make Washington the highest state and local REET rate in the country. And finally, there are significant unintended consequences on multifamily properties as a result of the 2019 REET increase that will only be exacerbated by this proposal. On a per unit basis, the REET is 2.5 times to 3 times higher than comparable single family homes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mike Ennis here on behalf of the Association of Washington Business, also opposed to House Bill 1628. Increasing the REET will increase the cost of housing across the state. For a $400,000 home, this bill would add about $1,000 to the overall sale price, and a REET is applied every time a transaction occurs. So every time that $400,000 house is sold, you're going to add an additional $1,000 to the price of that house. Even with the $5 million floor, this bill would also hit multifamily units. For example, a 20-unit apartment complex that sells for $6.5 million would see an increase of about $5,200 per unit. Most, if not all, that cost would be passed on to the renter in form of higher monthly rents. We cannot continue adding to the cost of housing and expect our affordability crisis to get better. For those reasons, we oppose the bill and ask you not to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Tim Eyman from Bellevue, and this bill is beyond absurd. It increases the cost of housing to make housing more affordable. It doesn't make any sense. It's bizarre, it's counterproductive, and it's completely goofy. Government created the problem. You limited the supply of housing, and then when demand exceeded supply, your government solution is to raise taxes, which only deals with the symptoms and not the disease. But you say it's a crisis, so we have to do something. Government never makes good decisions when bills are prefaced with that. In the past 10 years, the legislature has raised taxes 41 times, costing taxpayers $62.3 billion. How can you increase any tax or fee after raising it that much? It's uncompassionate, it's mean, it's vindictive, and I just don't think Washington citizens can afford Olympia's insatiable tax appetite. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
We'll go remote next. We have John Hines, Melanie O'Kane, and Brian Enslow.
So we're trying to prioritize people who are testifying in person. Is anyone?
I see Carl Schrader.
Perfect. Thank you.
Gordon Haggerty, I signed up for remote, but I'm here personally.
Okay, come on up.
Jeez, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Carl Schrader with the Association of Washington Cities here in support of this bill. You've already heard about the 1 million homes that we need in the next 20 years, and the number that we've been using is 500,000 of those need to be affordable at 0 to 50% of the median income. As a point of context, that's about 10 times the size of the state's housing trust fund, so we have a huge hole that we need to address. The private market can't deliver down to that income level. I wanted to talk about the concepts that you've heard about making housing more expensive to support affordable housing, and I appreciate Mike bringing up the $400,000 home. And the 0.25% local REIT would be $1,000. And I wanted to help you understand what that, how that relates to price increases we're seeing from appreciation. So OFM uses the Runstad data that showed almost 24% increase in the home values over the last year. At that rate, the cost increase would outweigh the implications of this 0.25% REIT in 4 days. So this is not going to affect the market, at least on the single family home side.
Can you send that to me in email, please?
Yep. You do. I'll happily send it to the whole committee.
Thank you. We're going remote to Melanie O'Kane and then Brian Enslow.
Good afternoon, Chair Doer and members of the committee. I'm Melanie O'Kane, Deputy Mayor for the City of Kenmore. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 1628. Funding for affordable housing is one of Kenmore's top legislative priorities. This proposal will provide a desperately needed funding tool for local communities to address the housing and homelessness crisis in our state. We also support consideration of an amendment to the bill that would allow the city's ability to choose to tier their share of the REIT, similar to how the state tiers its portion of the REIT. This amendment would support the efforts of cities to truly keep affordable housing affordable. Increasing and preserving housing options, affordable housing stock, is a top priority for Kenmore City Council to meet our community need. We appreciate how the legislation gives communities flexibility to tailor housing solutions to the needs of their community, and thank you for bringing forward this bill.
Thank you so much. And if you could email us your requested amendment.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Brian Enslow.
Brian Enslow here in support of 1628 on behalf of the City of Vancouver. I'm proud to put our name to the host of cities that support this measure. I'd like to help support the point that Mr. Schroeder said with respect to Clark County. In January of, of January in 2020, the median home sold in Clark County was 383,000. It peaked in May of 2022 at 550,000. So to say that a small incremental change in REIT has a meaningful difference on the actual price, I think is perhaps maybe factually accurate, but not what I would call the truth of what the market is. I would like to say that we believe in the City of Vancouver, we're doing everything. We have a great partnership with our housing association that's already signed in, and we're still at a deficit. We produce about 1,600 units a year, we need to produce 2,500. We need to produce 750 new affordable housing units, and we only produce around 240. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Staff, if you could help queue up remotely Patience Malaba, Amanda DeShazo, and Clifford Cawthorn, and then we'll go right here in person to these two folks.
Hello, my name is Gordon Haggerty, and I signed up to testify against this bill right now. Conflicted because I also have an adult son who lives with us with a developmental disability, and we're trying to plan for his future after we can no longer keep him at home. So we recognize the need for this, and at the same time, I'm also a rental housing provider who has been in that business for over 50 years, and so the issue of affordability for us is very important. So I would like to encourage you to maybe look at an area of being able to fund this without taxing the real estate industry too, and hampering the affordability on that side as well. So thank you for considering that.
Thank you for understanding the struggles.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is William Shadbolt. I'm here representing the Washington Business Properties Association that represents residential, commercial, and retail property owners in Washington State. The proposed increase in this REET would give us the nation's highest tax rate at a time when our current state revenues are at record highs and increasing. It does create some bizarre incentives. If you have a property owner that is looking to sell, it would actually save them millions of dollars by splitting the property up into condos. For example, a 200-unit building, selling the units at $500,000 would save the seller $3 million. The prime sponsor mentioned that an apartment building in his district sold for $330 million. If this bill had been enacted, that seller would have paid an additional nearly $10 million in REET. The idea that the private sector can't produce affordable homes is absurd when we have the multifamily tax exemption that has created thousands of affordable units. As the old adage says, if you want to get less of something, tax it. Combine this bill with the rent control bills that are being proposed, and you might as well just hang a sign up saying real estate investments not welcome in Washington State.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Patience Malaba.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. I am Patience Malaba, the Executive Director at the Housing Development Consortium of King County. I'm testifying in strong support of House Bill 1628, a bill that will expand the supply of affordable housing through critically needed investments. Housing affordability is at a crisis level in Washington State, and it would take all of us coming together to act at the scale we desperately need. The fundamental problem is we lack housing supply, and we have been woefully behind in investing in housing for our community. You heard for yourselves, we need 1 million homes, 500 of which will need revenue from government. And this bill before you creates a revenue source at the state level as well as at the local level to effectively address the exacerbated housing crisis. We are counting on you to lead and deliver. Please support House Bill 1628. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Amanda DeShazo.
Thank you. I'm Amanda DeShazer with the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium, testifying in support of 1628, the Affordable Homes Act. We're excited at the prospect of a new funding source for affordable housing, both at the state and local levels. Year after year, the requests for funding from the state far exceed that which is available. In Pierce County, we face the same challenges. This bill is another fiscal tool that will help alleviate the housing shortage and has the potential to double the number of affordable housing projects we're currently able to fund in Pierce County. Our local affordable housing developers are desperate for new financial resources as the costs of building are going up and the number of units we can afford to build keeps smaller. We hope that you'll pass this bill and support our members' great work to provide affordable housing for our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Clifford Cawthon.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Cliff Cawthon. I am the Advocacy and Policy Manager for Habitat for Humanity of Seattle, King, Kittitas counties. And I'm here in enthusiastic support of HB 1628. This bill to expand real estate excise tax and create new revenue to fund affordable housing is very needed. If this is a year for housing, then we need to be bold and fully fund affordable housing. This isn't a silver bullet, but fully funding of the construction of new affordable housing is a big part of addressing the crisis. The market alone will not provide the supply that we need. This revenue, creating a dedicated funding source will enable affordable housing developers like Habitat to work with cities and counties, especially places like Kittitas County, where we're developing an 18-unit complex, housing more families, create opportunities for home ownership. Moreover, we do need to fund housing across the housing continuum. So I urge you to please support this bill, provide the home ownership and rental and other housing opportunities we need for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go ahead and remote on Kevin Wallace and Marty Goodman?
One moment, please.
And then we'll queue up Mark Cody and Stacy Dim. Marty, I see you. Why don't you go ahead, please? Thank you.
Oh, okay. My name is Marty Goodman. I'm a multifamily developer. I'm testifying today on behalf of NAIOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. I'm speaking in opposition to SB 1628. Increasing the REET to a higher rate on top of what was approved 2 years ago would have a negative impact on the production of multifamily housing and may not generate more revenue for the state. Like most multifamily developers, our capital comes from out-of-state investment. While our developments are mostly market rate, every project has an affordable component, either affordable units in the building or payments to an affordable housing fund. When projects are completed, developers and their investors have the option to sell or hold and operate the asset. If the sales environment is favorable, many decide to sell and redeploy those proceeds into new investments. When the REIT was increased 134% in 2020, our investors were shocked at the impact to property sales. It has shifted the strategy to more of a hold rather than sell. Increasing another 1.25% would further incentivize holding versus selling. Those who prefer to sell upon completion would direct their investments.
Please finish up your comments.
In a more favorable favor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Jeff Pack, followed by Mark Cody and Stacy Dim.
My name is Jeff Pack, and I represent Washington Citizens Against Unfair Taxes, 3,000 plus very unhappy taxpayers. I'm here in violent opposition to this bill. You taxocrats in Olympia really like to play up the class warfare card, those evil rich people. We've hit them with an unconstitutional capital gains tax, taken away their $30 tabs, and now we'll stick it to them with higher excise taxes too. With property values that keep going up and up and taxes are going up, you just suck in more people that didn't necessarily ever consider themselves rich. We all thank you, as apparently I'm now rich, but with so many Washington state hands in my pocket, it sure doesn't feel like it. And to top it off, you're going to slip in higher local taxes too. Sure, what's more hand in there? I'm a human ATM. Where you folks continually miss the boat is the impacts of your decisions. You raise these taxes without ever looking at or even understanding the impacts. Do you think a rental property is just going to eat that 1 to 4%? Nope, that owner is going to raise the rentals to cover it. So pat yourselves on the back. You stuck it to those evil rich people yet again, just not necessarily people you intended to hit. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Mark Cody. I don't think we can hear you. I see you talking, though. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Thanks for hearing me. My name is Mark Cody. I'm the Executive Director of Parkview Services. I live in the 37th, and Parkview has offices in the 4th, 32nd, and 43rd. Parkview Services has developed 181 affordable housing units for extremely low-income people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in 60 properties around King, Snohomish, and Pierce counties. Parkview Services owns and manages the housing it develops. I support House Bill 1628 and urge you to pass it. The bill does three important things for affordable housing. One, it raises funds that would triple the amount of typically available to create and sustain affordable housing for people with IDDs. Two, it establishes the funds awarded to nonprofit developers serving extremely low-income people should be structured as recoverable grants, not interest-bearing loans. Affordable rents for this population are typically $275 per month. That is less than 30% of the fair market rent. There is simply no practical way to repay the loan. Three, it permits use of funds to provide operating and maintenance, preservation, and other housing services not otherwise paid for.
Please
Much
finish
needed
up.
funds to sustain affordable housing in perpetuity.
Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Stacy Dim.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Stacy Dim, and I live in Seattle in the 37th District. I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of Washington State, seated in Olympia in the 10th District, and I'm testifying in favor of House Bill 1628. The ARC promotes and protects the human and civil rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, ensuring their full inclusion and participation in the community throughout their lifetimes. We are in support of this bill, specifically with regard to the new way that funding would be generated to support housing for people with developmental disabilities. Our state has not had a substantial investment in this housing that keeps people out of institutions and living in homes in the community since the 1980s. We have gotten a handful of money through the Housing Trust Fund over the last few years that only gives us a housing stock of about 1,300 people. And as Mark mentioned, most of our folks need a capped rent at $300 a month. Our needs are not met by one of the housing efforts for people with behavioral support needs or homeless or unhoused, and we need this scattered site housing for those seniors that you heard about and others stuck in hospitals and other inappropriate boarding situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to suspend this hearing 1628 till Wednesday, and we will take more testimony Wednesday as we have time, and we will also have to take testimony on HB 1519 as well. So with that, we're adjourned.